Okay, well, why don't we get started? Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight for our gender disparities in the pandemic, the second in our community conversation series. Tonight's topic being around childcare and elder care. We're thrilled you're all here. And before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping details. And the first detail is we have a simultaneous Spanish language translation going. And so right now I will turn it over to our translator, Elena Garcia, to explain the Spanish language translation in Spanish for those who are listening in the Spanish language. So Elena, you want to take it from here?
Yes, thank you. Buenas tardes a todos. Va a haber interpretación al español esta noche. Para poderlo escuchar al español, tienen que ir al globo al inferior de su pantalla y escoger el canal español para poder seguir escuchando el resto de esta presentación en español. Gracias. Thank you, Laurel.
Oh, sure. Okay, for those of you not using the Spanish language translation, you don't have to do anything. Just keep your settings exactly as they are. The question and answer process, we'll be using the question and answer button at the bottom near the right-hand side for questions and answers, just like it says. And we'll be using the chat button also on the bottom to the left for comments that you'd like to make, or if you want to connect with other people in the webinar. We will do our gosh darn best to answer as many of your questions as possible. And questions may be posed in both English and Spanish. There may be occasional short delays when in our discussion, we may pause it when we have questions posed in Spanish so that our translator, Elena, can translate the question and not lose the thread of the discussion. So just to let you know that might happen. And then I also ask that if you'd be so kind to stay with us until the end of the event, if possible. There will be a link at the end of the event to a post-event survey. And that if you complete the survey, you will have a chance to win a $500 grant to the local nonprofit of your choice. And the drawing will be done tomorrow. Let's see. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to the Foundation's Executive Director, Adine Miller.
Thanks so much, Laurel. Good evening, everyone. I hope this time everybody finds you doing well and healthy. I'd like to first acknowledge that today is the first official day of the Lunar New Year. So if you are celebrating, Happy New Year. And I'd like to welcome all the attendees who are here. We have a number of different participants who are engaged in this conversation. They range from our donors to some of our founders, to those who are practicing philanthropy as professionals, to those who are donors in our midst, and community members and various leaders of different organizations and so on. I'd like to acknowledge that this event is co-hosted by the Los Altos Women's Caucus, and our annual sponsors are also helping us with underwrite this project. I have a little fly flying, just join me. So that includes Cal Water, Young Craig and Company, and El Camino Health. We also have a number of different co-sponsors for this conversation as well. Those include the AAUW, the Center for Age-Friendly Excellence, the City of Los Altos, the Day Worker Center. Thank you. I love having a list in front of me. The Day Worker Center of Mountain View, First Five Santa Clara County, Forum Health Fund, Los Altos Chamber of Commerce, Los Altos Town Crier, Los Altos Village Association, the Mountain View Chamber of Commerce, Parents Helping Parents, Senior Inclusion and Participation Project, and Starlight Caregivers. They all have an interest in this subject, and I think I'd like to acknowledge that we wouldn't be able to do this without their ability to get out the word for people to understand that we're having this conversation and how to participate in it. So with that out of the way, let me just frame a little bit of the conversation and we dive right into it. This is, as Laurel said, this is the second in a series of conversations we've been having. We did a deep dive into our first set of conversation around sort of the K-shaped recovery. We did that in the spring of last year. And then as I like to remind people, Los Altos Women's Caucus came to us and said, you have an opportunity to do a deeper dive than that. And so we focused on building a series that looked at the impact of the pandemic on women in a number of different areas, whether it was in the challenge around mental health, or in this case, the challenge of caring for others or supporting others. And then in the future session we're going to have in about a month and a half or so focused on careers and the impact of that. We toyed around with the idea that we could also have a fourth session, and we're actually, I think, going to go ahead and proceed with that, really focus more on policy and the implications of these conversations and what we can do as community members and community organizations and so on to address these issues more systematically. This one in particular is personal. It's, we see it play out in any number of different settings, in any number of just situations, but it's really like, how do, those who care for others and support others, how are they affected? And especially in women in this context, we can point to any number of different conversations and articles, which we've started to share already, that sort of speak to the challenge of this pandemic. I'll give you a case, a data point that just struck me more at the end of December. It was really timed at New Year's Eve, but it sort of highlighted the fact that over 167,000 children have believed to have lost a parent or a caregiver during COVID. Roughly 1 in every 450 young people in the United States under the age of 18. There's a void there. And who steps into it are people who, like grandparents, aunts, cousins, and so on, who also take on new burdens, or sometimes it's a single parent also in that situation. So we have this enormous kind of thing, one example, but enormous kind of like a issue that's playing out. The panel here is stellar. I can't wait for you to jump in and for them to jump into this conversation. They have been examining this issue not only in the pandemic, but in times before the pandemic, about the issues with respect to early childcare, caring for those who really do need additional support, caring for elders, and so on, and have certainly seen up close and personal the impact that the pandemic has had on women as caregivers and support. So without much further ado, I will move it on. I believe I'm going to introduce Daphne Ross from Los Altos Women's Caucus for a few quick words, and then we'll get on with the program. Thank you.
Thanks, Adine. Good evening, all. My name is Daphne Ross, and I'm a member of the Los Altos Women's Caucus, which is excited to be co-hosting this event with the Community Foundation. The Women's Caucus is a group that encourages women's leadership in local community and civic affairs. We support fair-minded, effective candidates for local office during election cycles, and we hold education events for the community around salient issues. So thank you for being here with us and learning about this important topic alongside us. I have the privilege to introduce Dr. Heidi Emberling, our moderator this evening. Dr. Emberling is Deputy Chief of Early Learning at First 5 Santa Clara County. She's worked in the field of early learning and care for more than 20 years, focusing on supporting young children, families, and early educators. Prior to First 5, Dr. Emberling was director at Parents Place, a program of Jewish family and children's services, where she worked for 16 years. I personally have attended several of her workshops about parenting young children when she was at Parents Place. So I can truthfully say that they were lifelines for me as a first-time parent. Welcome, Dr. Emberling.
Thank you, Daphne. And thank you for coming to the workshops. It's great that you were there. I want to thank the Los Altos Community Foundation and the Los Altos Women's Caucus for co-hosting this really important community conversation. Gender-based disparities have existed, of course, for a long time, but since the pandemic, they have been magnified in our community. The lack of consistent paid leave, increased family caregiving responsibilities, traditional gender roles, pandemic health concerns, all of these issues have disproportionately fallen on the shoulders of women, particularly BIPOC women, single women, women who work in low income jobs. Just to share a few statistics as we get started here, 1 in 10 women report quitting a job due to pandemic related reason. 3 out of 10 working mothers said they had to take time off to care for a child or an elder relative. In addition to juggling new and increased home and work responsibilities, 47% of working mothers said they had to take unpaid sick leave because their child's school or childcare was closed. This rises to 65% among moms who work in low-income jobs and 70% among those working part-time. More than 1 in 10 women report they were caring for a family member who needed special assistance prior to the pandemic, and of course, consistently need that care post-pandemic. And over half of mothers with school-age children said that the stress and worry of the pandemic has affected their mental health, with 1 in 5 of them characterizing this impact as major. But only 16% of mothers have the capacity to seek out mental health care. So that's the landscape within which we're having this very important conversation about gender disparities that have shown up since the pandemic began. I'd like to turn to our panelists now, and starting with Duani Hurd, in your role as president and CEO of Starlight Caregivers, what pandemic consequences are you seeing among your caregivers and families at this phase of the pandemic?
Thanks, Dr. Emmerling. I'm the CEO and the co-founder of Starlight Caregivers, and I have to say, we are in every way on the pulse of the challenges in this pandemic. And first, just a brief introduction of what we do as caregivers. And Starlight is in its 9th year in business as a licensed home care organization under the Department of Social Services in the state of California. And our business was founded in 2013 with our first office in Palo Alto, then relocated to Los Altos in 2016. And our office is right here in the heart of the community on the 2nd floor of the 2-story building next to the storied and famed restaurant Chef Chu's. We currently have over 130 active employees, including 9 office staff, and our employees are experienced caregivers, companions, certified nursing assistants, home health aides, medical assistants, and licensed nurses. We not only work with clients in private homes, but also in many Bay Area care facilities to provide one-on-one care by providing home care and care management services. Not only in this pandemic, which really pushed it to the top of the height of the services, but in general, local hospitals, senior centers, aging life care managers, nursing homes, independent living facilities, assisted living facilities oftentimes call us to provide services to their patients or clients. Home health agencies and hospice agencies also refer clients to us to provide home care services to supplement their Medicare authorized skilled nursing services. And as you can see, we encompass the core and the heart of community-based healthcare and wellness management. And in the subsequent conversations, I'm sure we'll explore all aspects of it and just a glimpse of it. And we have provided services over 300,000 hours and over 6 clients during the past 8 years and 8.5 years, including many members in this very tight-knit community. Navigating this service can be very challenging for all, especially during this pandemic, not only on the client's or the patient's part, but also on the caregiver's part. I'm just excited to be here to be one of the panelists in this community conversation that is focused on caregiving. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Devani. Let's turn to you, September Jarrett. As an education program officer at the Heising Simons Foundation, tell us a little bit about what you are seeing in terms of the pandemic consequences in your work.
Yeah, thanks so much. This is such an important conversation. And Heidi, in some ways, you covered a few of the statistics. I'm policy trained, and I have a bit of a perch of a view of the intersectional impacts of what's happening and how for our youngest children birth to 5 and their families, and their parents and their paid caregivers who are really caught in the crosshairs or a vise of the pandemic. I'd like to say that child development is human development, and I expect many of us may have the gift or opportunity of helping raise young children, or we're at least once a young child ourselves. And so remember the magic of those critical years and literally what does or doesn't happen for you as you're forming your first relationships, and literally the neural pathways of your brain really sets trajectories of life, and trajectories of opportunity are possible for all, but are often not created for some of our youngest children. I want to talk a little bit about childcare pre-pandemic and then what the pandemic's done to exacerbate inequities and challenges for our nation's youngest children and their families. I just want to contextualize a little bit of what Heidi shared. First, just pre-pandemic, over 15 million children under the age of 6 in the US require some form of weekly paid childcare due to the workforce participation of their parents. Childcare takes place in many settings in lots of beautiful forms, in homes, in community settings, and in schools. That choice and diversity is a strength in the United States, but also a challenge to addressing some of the problems I'll talk about. The sad reality in the US is that costs are higher than almost all families can afford. Quality is often lacking, and the system is honestly balanced on the back of abysmally poor wages for the professionals who do this very complex and demanding work for a living. I just double checked, and yes, you can make more at an In-N-Out burger in the Bay Area right now in terms of paid hourly wage and benefits than some of our community-based childcare centers in the area are paying, even through the pandemic. And I want to say that lack of accessible and affordable and consistent childcare, and we'll talk about consistency through the pandemic of school and childcare, has really negative career effects on families, affecting the hours they can work, as well as their earning and promotion opportunities. And this disproportionately impacts women because in this society, we are the default caregivers. I want to talk a little and offer a resource. These critical years of family foundation, literally birthing, for those of us who've had the opportunity of rearing a young human, is a demanding 24/7 hour job. So we need to talk about parents, and then we need to talk about the paid and unpaid caregivers who create the circle around a young child. I want to lift up a resource called Rapid Assessment of Pandemic Response Early Childhood, or Rapid EC. It's really important work of Dr. Phil Fisher out of the University of Oregon that I've shared with the foundation and caucus leaders. It's a frontline study that was staged up in the pandemic of the real-time experience of parents with young children under 5 throughout the US. It's a nationally representative sample, and it really shines a light on the challenges that existed before the pandemic and have honestly been cracked open. What did we learn from Dr. Fisher's work? We learned, actually, if you're a parent or a woman, a mother of a young child under 5, more than 1 in 3 caregivers stepped out of the workforce during the pandemic because of the demands and needs and lack of childcare for young children. Disproportionately, Black mothers, Latino mothers, and single mothers were the most likely to step out of the workforce and the hardest hit economically. I checked the data, and I feel fairly confident in this, but I know there's wisdom in this room. Almost 1 in 4 children in our region experienced food insecurity during the pandemic and continue to. When childcares and schools closed at the height of pandemic, nationally, we estimated a $700 billion cost to the economy. Now, I don't think rearing young humans is only an economic prospect, but those of us who work or need to work to pay our bills know it's a big part of the equation. I want to acknowledge this is really human, that the pandemic has hit every group of Americans, and millions are suffering, hungry, and grieving. And mothers and paid caregivers in particular get no space or time to recover. What do I mean by this? Mothers often do the mental load of running households, and increasingly so with the pandemic. I'm the CEO of a multi-generational household with a disabled teen and an elderly mother. I have the benefit of a partner and a life partner who shares work, but who made sure the kids' schedule was working as the IT support, planned the meals, bought the food, scheduled the virtual, medical appointment for mom, or made sure that Zoom worked for her. Or the question is, when I lose it, it's like, how can I help? What's wrong with that? Like, why am I working full time and the CEO on top of? And there's research that calls that the mental load. And women carry more of a mental load of caregiving in general, and disproportionately so in the pandemic. And it's sort of, my children, my man boy teenagers play video games, and I consider it like leveling up. The pandemic has been like, I can work full time, I can have young children, I can care for my elderly parents, I can do it all. And then the next thing happens: childcare closes, school closes, getting the routine preventative or maintenance health care that's needed to prevent a bigger problem is not available because of the pandemic, and the pressures increase. I want to say that this survey of parents of young children at this critical formational stage of family and life outcomes report almost 70% of mothers of young children in the US right now say that worry and stress have damaged their health. Quote from the survey: "With everything going on, I just don't have the time to take care of my mental health right now. I have to keep it together for everyone else." And that's too representative of far too many women and parents. And I want to say that the natural circle around working mothers and working parents are extended caregivers, family, friend, and neighbors that are unpaid or paid extensions of care for young children, as well as professionals. And I want to say that the pressures I've described for working women and parents of young children are magnified by the paid professional early care and education workforce. Pre-pandemic, the early care and education workforce in California earned wages so low that 1/3 of full-time early care and education workers qualified for public benefits or support for food or healthcare or housing support. Working full-time, rearing the next generation, and not able to pay your bills. I want to say that through the pandemic, caregivers who are essential workers risk their own health, especially pre-vaccine, and the health of their families by opening their homes to those of other families who needed to work, and often saw little remuneration or respect or thanks in return. With COVID precautions in place in childcare that's very regulated, like Duani's work with Eldercare for a good place of safety and reason, in COVID, childcare providers can serve fewer kids because of social distancing and face greatly increased costs, especially due to cleaning and sanitation. So what was at best a marginal break even a very marginal profit business has become highly costly. We see from data from the Center for the Study of Childcare Employment some really troubling things about childcare operators that are still working full-time, running their businesses. And I'll close with some hope. I will say we see increased debt burdens, people running their childcare businesses on credit cards, and or other like financial challenges where people are really stretching beyond belief, and the kind of federal or public relief that's coming through has not been sufficient enough to stabilize the fragile businesses. I want to briefly say there's a lot that can be done. This was very depressing information I shared with you. I'll be very brief. I don't want to end on a note of despair. We have examples throughout the world about what can and should be done to center our communities and our youngest children and their families at this critical stage, to hold them in our hearts and support them in our society. What can you do? Individually, practice grace. See, name, and notice. If you are a caregiver, give yourself grace and be kind to yourself, and take as much care as you can for yourself and show it to the caregivers in your circle that you rely on. Also, name and notice. If you're not an active caregiver at this stage of life, name and notice the people in your circle and community who are. Even stopping on the street, I stopped with a woman who had 3 screaming kids while I was walking my dog and said, "This is so hard. Is there anything I can do to help you?" That small act, which I do often, sends a message to what is an invisible challenge that we're not talking and seeing enough in our communities. Organizationally, if you're in a position of leadership, what can your organization do for the working parents and caregivers in your community? Get back to the basics. Do you really need that meeting at a set time? Do people really need to be there? Can we be flexible? Record meetings. What flexibility can you give people to get work done around their caregiving responsibilities? Create a buddy system. If you have active parents of young children with disrupted childcare on your team and the constant change of disrupted schedules, can you pair them up with non-parent or caregiving colleagues to feed them in, read them in, have their back so they don't miss critical information, but don't always have to be in the room? Last but not least, because thank you, Women's Caucus, for framing this conversation and foundation. There are policy changes. That's a future conversation, but listen and learn and read and vote critically. I think journalists in particular have done a good job of naming and noticing the hidden work of especially childcare and elder care giving it through the pandemic, but haven't yet stretched to the solutions. I think we saw a lot more in headlines about the cost of a social spending plan and not the value it could potentially give, for example, in childcare. If Build Back Better comes to fruition, and that's a big if, I just want to say, families would pay 7% of the income of childcare. There would be a major infusion of free public preschool. It would be transformative to the young children in our country, for example. So listen, learn, think critically, ask questions, and make sure that kids are centered in some of the policy considerations at your local level, at the state level, and federally.
Thank you so much. I could listen to you all evening. You have so much great information to share, Dr. Jarrett. Thank you. And thanks for doing all this great thinking on this particular topic, and also suggesting many ways in which we can uplift women in our community and caregivers in particular. So thank you so much. I want to turn to Mona Rad. In your work as an education program manager at Parents Helping Parents, tell us a little bit about what you do and what you're hearing about the stresses and anxieties of parents at this phase in the pandemic.
Thank you, Dr. Emberling. This is such a fantastic conversation, and I love what we heard already. And I'm like, you said so much that has so much value and highlights how important it is that we look at the children we are educating, we are raising. What I do at Parents Helping Parents is, so Parents Helping is an agency that has been around for 40 years. And it started because mothers realized they were not finding the information they needed as they were raising children that had different challenges. There was, quite a bit going on for most kids, but when they had particular questions about their child's growth and development that wasn't happening as expected, there was very little. So Parents Helping Parents was founded. over the years, it has grown into an amazing parent-run organization that provides, it's a private nonprofit, and we provide information, resources, and support to families who call us. They call us with a variety of issues, and the job that I have currently focuses on questions related to education. So when a parent has concerns about what's happening at school, but also in preschool and even in the early years, we have information to help guide them. And what matters for us is that we give them accurate information, but also that we give them the shortcuts to arrive to what it is that they're looking for. Sometimes you read flyers, pamphlets, and you're like, this is so complicated, right? and as parents, we have fallen through some issues trying to reach this information. So for us, it's very important that it be concise, that it be precise, and that people can access the info. Information is very empowering because at many levels, if parents don't understand what they can do, then the concern just continues and is not addressed, and their child isn't learning. In the education department at Parents Helping Parents, we receive calls from lots of families who, again, have questions. It's very important for us that we maintain confidentiality of the conversation, and we are very good at listening to what their concern is and offer the appropriate resources. So this is in the education department. What has happened over the okay, so what happens with the questions? Very often a child who is struggling needs to be identified as a child with a learning challenge, maybe. And it's important that the parent is aware of their option to ask for an assessment and how to ask for an assessment and what are the steps in the process and what is the timeline. And then when the assessment happens, what is the conversation like? What are the, reports have to be produced, and how can they participate in the meeting? How can they be engaged in the conversation? And it's a process that nobody knows about. If you haven't needed to go through, it's not your usual thing. Usually you talk to the teacher, you talk to the principal if you have a little concern, and that's it. So Parents Helping Parents receives a lot of these calls and helps orient families. We also have an area, we also have a group of people who are able to answer questions that are not related to education. That could be public benefits, childcare questions, they could be recreation in the community, how to achieve things that they want to achieve for their child, but nobody knows what to tell them. What happened during the pandemic? So basically, we are very used to having families call us, and it's often mothers. 90% of the calls come from mothers, and they are the emissaries of the family, right? And I think they take on the task of exploring, finding information, they're realizing things aren't working for them, and they ask, and somebody says, call Parents Helping Parents, and they call us. When they call us, it's very important that we are listening to their issue and we help them formulate what they're looking for. And then this is how we support them. During the pandemic, so we're used to mothers calling us, but during the pandemic, these calls took on another proportion. It was truly a tsunami of calls. They were coming in huge amounts, and families were lost. They didn't know where to start. They didn't know what to do. And sometimes they just called to say, I'm just calling to see if you're here. And we would say, yes, we're here. But sometimes we didn't have answers for them. At the same time, we quickly put together, as the pandemic progressed, a bunch of resources to support them as best as we could. Now we're almost 2 years into this pandemic, and we have some supports that will help address the mental health needs. We have supports in relation to schools, and I heard the previous panelists talk, and I'm thinking this has been so hard for women. Imagine mothers who have children who are having some serious health issues, having serious behavioral concerns, are not expressing themselves, are not participating in the screens. And how do you manage this household that's full of, schedules? Parents being home working, so we received, it was traumatic for everybody. We received calls where people would say, you have no idea, you cannot imagine. The families were even further isolated because many of the support staff or the respite people that usually come into the homes were not able to come. Many of the children have medically fragile conditions, so you don't want them to come to your house. The natural supports that was spoken about, the natural supports also, we were isolated from them. So it's been a challenge. I do want to point out, though, that throughout the pandemic, we got a lot of calls from families who, because they sat intimately with their children, learned so much about how their child learns, what helps and what doesn't help. Now they are better participants in meetings with the school to help address their special education needs. And it's been brilliant because although this is what they were supposed to do in the first place, participate, they didn't have the same perspective that they now have. They can see now that their child can learn, and they are more aware of what the conditions are for their child to be able to learn. Yeah.
Thank you, Mona.
You're welcome.
I really love your description of the tsunami of calls. I think we all feel like this pandemic has brought this tsunami upon us all. And certainly what we're hearing from all of you is the gendered consequences of the pandemic and how that's intersecting with other entrenched inequalities. In particular, I'm thinking about women and work and how the closure of schools and childcare revealed how fragile women's participation in the workforce can be, because women's jobs are more likely to be part-time, flexible, lower paid. Women are much more likely to leave their jobs than men in this sort of situation. And then single parents shoulder even more of the burden, because when schools and childcare facilities close, how do they juggle earning and caring, as Dr. Garrett was mentioning? And the situation's even more challenging for BIPOC women, with 54% of Black women reporting a financial strain from a lost job or income, compared with 27% of white men. So panelists, I'm wondering, are you seeing a difference in pandemic consequences and stress levels and anxieties between male and female caregivers? Are the negative effects similar across gender, racial, socioeconomic lines? Just wondering what you are noticing in your work. And Duani, let's go back to you. What are you seeing at your agency?
Such a great topic. First and foremost, I want to say, this pandemic's impact has been so severe that it really has across the gender lines, and also, being reflected not only on the client side, but also on our caregiver staff side. And I have seen anxiety, agitation, disorientation, depression, um, just popping up every day at any moment, at all fronts, right? And sometimes folks just snapped because it's been so long. And when it comes to genders, we're talking about the topics of caregiving. So I'm joking, but not just joking. So let's, take a look amongst ourselves, right? Tonight in this group, and how many of us participating in this conversation are female versus male, men versus women, right? And so that might give us some aspects of it. And first and foremost, we have a severely reduced workforce to start with. For us, the domestic talents, be that the aging adult caregivers or the child caregivers, in general, they were already in shortage before the pandemic. And during the pandemic, that shortage just in a way that got skyrocketed, when it comes to how much this workforce has been reduced. Just by looking at our own company, it's almost immediately got cut by 30%. Because our caregiver staff, they have their loved ones to take care of, and they have their own health concerns and their own physical and medical conditions. As the previous panelists have discussed, and the home environment, working environment, the resources, the supplies have all come into play. With our company, when it comes to caregivers and staff, we have the ratio between women and men about 4:1. And women are the 4 and men are the 1, when it comes to the ratio. And out of the women, which is the majority of our staff, and over 90% of them are mothers and grandmothers. And so their first responsibility is to really take care of their loved ones. And it's pretty obvious, when you look at the women that are involved, and they worry about their children, they worry about their elderly before fitting work into their day. And what does that reflect when it comes to working hours? And they still work, oftentimes we're in this world, working world. We have both men and women of the couple working and to support, by bringing the bread onto the table. And for women, that usually means very long hours working at night, and with a fraction of availability during the day, if they have to take care of their aging adults in the family and their children. And for our men, and they're just as dedicated, they're fantastic caregivers. They're highly skilled and experienced, but oftentimes we see that they worry about keeping their health, making sure that they can remain working the very long hours, as the very traditional breadwinners of the family. And again, this mental health situation is not only affecting, it affects everybody, not only the staff, but also the clients, not only the clients, also the caregiver staff, the people that are receiving care and the people that are giving care. And some things that we have seen that are interesting, that surfaced and actually remain through the pandemic is first and foremost, the mental health related care is really increasing. When it comes to that, companion care services and social activities that are in high demand. folks that used to be able to go out for lunches, hikings, going to the support centers. Through the pandemic, they're not able to do so. The restaurants were closed and the support centers are closed. And the interesting fact is, that yearning for connection and human connection is just so much out there. And I have noticed that my aging elderly clients are almost the very first ones who actually didn't want to wear the masks when we visited them at their home. Why is that? Because of the isolation, and really that desire for connection. They want to see you, they want you to hear them. And of course, there's also a physical challenge that hearing the voices over the mask can be difficult when there's a hearing impairment. And another one that we're seeing is the increasing needs for daily living support. This is not only just from the caring for our very terminally ill patients or the hospice clients, but it's also reflected in the everyday care. Folks need support, ranging from buying groceries, running errands, and arranging to fix plumbing issues, block sewer lines, and those helps are everywhere. We have a lot of clients that they don't have family members that live locally or nearby. They can be out of the state, they could be internationally, and they really rely on our staff and our caregivers to be there, on a daily basis, sometimes on a minute basis, and that reflects in the length of care. Before the pandemic, we have about 40% of our clients that are using short hours. When we say the short hours, usually that's under 8 hours, maybe twice, 3 times a week. But during the pandemic, those clients with the short hours first, that burden got shifted to the family members. And they took care of it because they wanted to, kind of isolate their loved ones. So they're kind of thinking getting away from the virus, from the infection, from the exposure. But as time went by, this pandemic just seems like it just keeps going longer and longer. It seems never gonna end. Family members, primary caregivers, most of them are women, having to take care of the children, educate children at home when the school was closed. And they just, how long can you be the major driving force in the sandwich generation, taking care of your aging loved ones, taking care of your children, and you can't last forever. So when that happens, they have to take care of themselves. They're overly tired, exhausted, snapped, and burned out. And the family members have to, step back. So the length of care increased. We used to see our clients needing 8 hours. Now it went up to half day or full day, 24/7 care. And what about our caregivers? We talk about some differences between male and female, and when it comes to gender disparities, but on the other hand, it's interconnected. The family has to work together, husband and wife have to work together. And as two people that are primary workers and supporting the family, we see the challenges in transportation, in personal prepared equipment. We mentioned the childcare and grandchild care. We talk about the sick leave and family leave. We as caregivers, we struggle as essential workers working at the front line. But on the other hand, we have our own health risk as well, and as well as our loved ones. Oftentimes we hear from our clients, what are your precautions, right? And do you know your staff are exposed or have they been infected? Have they been tested? And I really worry about them, sometimes, and their mask was taken off for a few minutes, we're talking about for as long as 12-hour care with the clients, because they have to have a breather by going outside and just to breathe some fresh air. And because, we don't require our aging clients wearing their masks in their private home, but our staff have to. And so I'm talking about is, I oftentimes say, Trust me, our staff are just worried and concerned about getting exposed and getting infected just as everybody else and the people that they're taking care of. Because once they go home, and if they got exposed, they got infected, they're going to spread that to their own loved ones, not only their elderly, but also their children. And that, everybody gets sick, nobody can work. Our sick leaves, family leaves are limited. So those are all challenges. One of the primary concerns, for example, is transportation. And we live in this extremely expensive area for most of the essential workers and the support workforce. How do they get here? Usually it takes them at least an hour to over an hour coming here from the East Bay. For example, our core of services here on the peninsula. They come from the East Bay, they come from South or East San Jose. Driving for an hour and coming here, it has to be meaningful for them to work, right? Even with that, a lot of staff, a family shares one car. What do? Husband drops wife off. And after dropping their children off at school, and you take many turns to do that. So we have a big gender disparity, but on the other hand, in our caregiving world, everybody works together and share that challenges and share that lack of resources.
Thank you, Duani. You're describing a situation that feels untenable and unsustainable. And certainly, I'm sure that you're facing a lot of exhaustion and burnout in the work that you do every day and that your caregivers do every day. And thank you for describing it. Mona, just while we're here on this topic, I'm thinking about families who have children with disabilities. And I'm thinking about the sense of exhaustion and feelings of overwhelmness. And are you seeing differences in terms of male and female caregiving? Any socioeconomic differences, racial differences? Or does it feel like the same kind of story that Duani was sharing in terms of this exhaustion and burnout?
Well, the stress is pervasive, right? Everybody is stressed, and it's affecting both males and females, mothers, fathers, everybody is stressed. What we see at Parents Helping Parents is that mothers express their stress in a different way. They need more time expressing what they want. They have a sense of they've lost hope. They, even in the way that they formulate the question, they're going everywhere. We're not quite sure what's going to be helpful to them, and that's a sign of trauma, really. When dads call us, when fathers or uncles call us, it's usually fathers, they are very tense, they are short, they sometimes have even lost the sense of civility. They just want to get to straight the answer. They're also not able to see, so sometimes we're describing a process, like first this is what's going to happen and this, and they don't want to hear it's like, let me go with the first and then we'll worry about what happens next. It's almost like their life is unfolding day by day. And I like that. Not that I like the idea that they can tell me, I don't want to hear anymore. This is what I need today, and then I'm going to go with it. The sense of loss is for everyone, but there is always a difference socioeconomically when you are not able, you do not have the means to go out and get what you think your child needs. Then with the pandemic, that difficulty is way more. For example, there were a few programs that offered recreation and offered fresh air, and they were expensive, right? So I wish more families could benefit from the programs that were available in the community, but they were expensive. And I knew that it was, leaving a lot of people out of this, this event. We saw loss of so So when you talk about losses, parents were not able to get the therapies that their kids needs, whether it's physical therapy, speech therapy, behavior support, vision therapy. I mean, there are so many pieces to a child's learning that a kid with disability needs. So we witnessed a lot of regression. I'm trying to look at the father versus mother in the family. What happens a lot, what happened during the pandemic is that there was a sense of closeness that happened. Families did learn to slow down a little bit. And I think they learned to get a little bit closer. In a family that's raising a child that has challenges, there is always, usually you have a plan A and a plan B. Well, for our families, it's a plan A, B, C, D. And you cannot run all these plans if you do not have a CEO. Who was saying September, right? You have to be the CEO and you have to engage everyone. And it's hard because at first it's not working, but then you have to make it work. The pandemic was very isolating. You couldn't hope. And every morning we would wake up and it's like, okay, this is not a nightmare. This is for real. How is this day going to go? So I think it did bring families close together. And we've heard, and at PHP, we were able to Zoom with families. I mean, the technology was interesting. At first, it was like, we don't know how to do this. And some families were disadvantaged. But when they were able to use it, then finally we had the privilege of entering into their homes. And then mothers were saying, wait, let me call my husband. And then the husband would come in and we would continue the conversation. And then sometimes we would see the kids, which is totally cute, which is how it should be. So there was a sense of, we can do this together. We need to make it work, but let us not forget that there was a lot of anger. There was a lot of lashing out because that's part of what stress does. There was a lot of miscommunication. And that happened. So now I'm in education. That happened vis-a-vis the schools and the teachers. And it's so sad because everybody's trying hard. Everybody wants to a teacher wants to teach and they were facing their own challenges. So our role at PHP was sometimes to help the caller see the other person's situation and be able to be, I think it was September who also said graceful. Be graceful with each other. How can we help each other? I have a child with special needs, and there were some perfect strangers that came to our house and said, do you want, I just planted cucumber seedlings. Do you want? And I'm like, sure. And it was warm, it was touching, it was nice to feel that people were trying to connect in whatever ways. More recently, so yeah, in families, being a team works.
And it's also really addressing the point that Duani made earlier about the yearning for human connection, that our communities are looking for that human connection between the seniors and the caregivers that she was referring to, and your neighbor and the cucumber. And then also September, you were mentioning just saying something kind to someone who was struggling on the street. And just turning to you, September, do you have other things that you have noticed in your work around these differences in male and female, the effects, the disparities about this pandemic response?
I'm really moved. I think I've covered a lot of it. I do think some of the extended caregiving or even managing the schedule of disrupted childcare when school closes or there's staff shortages or there's an exposure does disproportionately fall to women and families to manage, figure out, plan, mitigate, peer share, right? Like parents helping parents. What do? We spell each other, special needs parents or not. So I think that's a piece. I would say for the professionalized early care and education workforce, the vast majority of the workforce is women. And the predominant part of the workforce are women of color in California. This is, and I would say a few things about, I think, some of the racialized or disparate impacts of the pandemic on the sector is early care and education is not yet good jobs. And so sometimes people are called to the work of nurturing and educating the next generation, have cross subsidy in their households that make it possible for them for this to be their profession. That by far is women who look like me and who are not increasingly look like the children who are the face of California, Latino children, children of color. And we see that the essential workers that maintain and are sort of the backbone that enable the rest of us to work are increasingly women of color who see a lot of racialized pay disparities. Folks who choose to care for other people's children in their homes. Family childcare business owners are amazing entrepreneurs who work really long hours, and we see them being paid a lot less than childcare educators who work in school settings, for example. So there's kind of what we call an infant toddler pay parity. There's a community-based childcare, family childcare pay parity, and a really difficult and disturbing thing came up, because childcare are essential workers. We all learned how essential they were when our childcare was disrupted or our elder care was disrupted to the pandemic. We saw childcare workers who take place on school settings actually had some working protection, had paid days, or were able to teach virtually when some of the rest of the childcare workforce was not. And a lot of the folks that were maybe able to continue their work without the exposure to the coronavirus tended to be school-based workers, tended to be the higher paid sector of the workforce. And we see to this day, there's urgent action in Sacramento to put in place paid COVID days. If you were a family childcare owner, for example, and you needed to close because you got the virus, and you received government funding for some of those days, well, tuition wasn't paid by private families, and government sick days essentially were capped. So you maybe early on in the pandemic needed to isolate and recover for 10, 14 or longer days. There was no stability or source of income for you to do that. And so there's, policy efforts. For example, right now, the field has risen up and said, hey, childcare is essential. We need those COVID sick days back to continue through this pandemic or endemic situation with the virus and how it's impacting care communities. So lots still to do and impacts, and it's women, but there's hope.
I, for one, am very glad that you're at the advocacy table. So thank you so much. I mean, it's clear from this conversation that in order for us to prevent further deepening of gender inequality, it's necessary and possible to take account of the unpaid care burden placed on women and families, especially during this pandemic, and advocate for these social protection measures that reflect an understanding of women's circumstances. So I think you've mentioned some, September, and also government subsidies or extended unemployment benefits to workers who leave work to care for children or elders during the pandemic, removing the requirement for caregivers to actively seek work in order to be eligible for unemployment. If they're caregiving, they shouldn't have to do that. Expanding access to paid family leave, paid sick leave, as you were just mentioning, increase access to quality, affordable childcare and elder care, maybe tax credits that encourage companies to rehire mothers. There's all kinds of policies out there that we can think about together. panelists, as we think about the coming year, what and Dr. Jarrett, you mentioned a few of these early on, but what's one strategy or idea for how our communities can better support women and or alleviate the increased care burdens that are being placed on them during this pandemic? Who would like to start with that one?
I can start.
Thank you, Dwani.
Yeah, so I can't help but start again with the challenges we're facing, right? And so for us, we're professional caregivers. So we know how to give care and how to take care of your loved ones so you're able to return your workforce. Your elderly, your children are taken care of, and you have your physical and emotional health. And again, we have a focus here about women, and women is holding the fort when it comes to their loved, doesn't matter, the aging adults, the children, regardless as caregivers on the giving end or the receiving end. Women are natural caregivers. They relate and connect, and they're extremely emotionally involved. They work day and night taking care of two generations, grandchildren, children, parents, grandparents. They go all in until they're burned out. And their needs are often pushed to the last, or at the bottom of the list. However, this is very difficult situation because caregiving needs to remain in the space for sustainability. What does that mean? There needs to be an ending, a timeout. As professional caregivers, we always say, and this is your work, that's your personal life. There needs to be a line. You got to draw a line. You need to pause, take a break, freshen up mentally and emotionally before dedicating your body, heart, and soul back to the work of care. However, this pandemic has made it extremely difficult to take a break, to draw a line. Before the pandemic, the private life was more manageable because we had schools and senior support centers, and we had less the workforce shortage, but now all the lines are blurred. And what can we do? With that said, when the women or the staff in general are juggling many balls in the air, sometimes some balls drop and they pick up and continue, and they take it all in. And on the other hand, as employers, and we try our best, to provide flexibility, be that remote working, Zoom meetings, at any time, given time with our office staff, and or flexibility with giving care services when it comes to, vary the shifts, how do we put it together, so our staff can continue to take care of the clients while taking care of their own needs and their loved ones' needs. And we came up with different kind of commute supports for our staff. We oftentimes offer transportation through Uber, Lyft, and we have our office staff, driving field staff, many times, sometimes on a regular basis, even picking up their children from school, even taking their children in our office, taking care of them, while our staff work in the field, taking care of our clients. We delivered many times for the PPEs, for the protection, for the staff, for the clients, for everybody. And one interesting thing is we have our care package program with our company. And guess what? Usually we send out our care packages to our clients once we get a client passing. We send it to the family members, to the responsible party. During the pandemic, we probably have sent more care packages to our staff compared to our clients, because our staff have been sick, they have family members passed away, There are people that, they love that needs care. And I give one example before I, end this topic. We have one staff. During the past 2 years, I've taken care of 2 clients. Both went through the hospice process and both passed away. And we shed our tear together, and because it was such an emotional process. And she took care of not only the humans in this relationship, but their pets as well. But in private life, she's got a daughter, adult daughter, that has mental health illness. She has to take care of her. And then just a week ago, her own mother, that lives in Arizona, broke her hip. So she rushed over there and taking care of her mother. And mother has to be moved to a facility. The facility could not take more people in because of COVID spreading. She got stuck there, worried about everybody, her current client, her daughter with mental health situations, and her mother that's desperate, needs to move to a facility. What can we do? We send care packages.
Yeah, that's really a great story. I mean, the mental health burden is, we could do a whole evening on that as well. And I really appreciate a lot of the sentiments that you shared just now. I was attending our Healthier Kids Foundation and First Five infant conference a few weeks ago, and Alicia Lieberman from UCSF was there speaking, and she said, she was talking about intergenerational healing, and she said, compassion that does not include ourselves is not complete. And I was thinking about that as you were talking. We have to remember to have compassion, not only for others, but for ourselves and for the burdens that we carry. She's so wise, and I just wanted to share that. Your story made me think of that as well. Mona, how are you seeing this, and how do you see communities being able to support parents during this time?
There are lots of ideas. Of course, the mental health piece is huge, and at Parents Helping Parents, we've been fortunate to have this Saving Our Sanity support group where parents drop in, and the groups are facilitated by mental health professionals. And what the families are learning, what parents, and it's mostly women, they are learning positive coping skills. They are learning, sometimes they say nothing, but they are in the presence of other parents who are coping and who are looking for skills and working hard to get to a place where their lives are better balanced. They are doing things such as reaching online to do exercise classes. I mean, there's a variety of, and that's one part. But when I think of a community, I also think about programs and anything that's being planned in your communities. Plan for our children, plan for everyone participating, plan for them to come and enjoy themselves without families coming in thinking, okay, how is this going to work? Let there be in every community center, in every recreation, in every, the arts, that let there be a space for children who long to connect and to do the things. They're going to be doing it differently, and it's going to take a little time, but you'd be amazed how little by little they start enjoying what you're putting together. So I would like to encourage anyone who's planning anything, including a little party in your house or whatever it is. Think of the kids in your child's school that isn't invited, and what would it look like? And sometimes that child could participate for a very, very short time, but it'll make a huge difference. So this is, I think, how communities can. I have another idea, and the other panelists brought it up. People who support our children need to be paid better. I recently was able to witness a lovely person who came from Canada. And I found out that in Canada, there is a degree in supporting people with developmental disabilities. And I had no idea this existed. And not just the background, the degree, but they need to be paid better so that the disparity between what I do, what everybody does, just becomes smaller. It just becomes normal for mothers to go out and do what it is that they need to do.
Thank you, Mona.
You're
I'm
welcome.
seeing Dr. Jarrett nod vigorously during that, and I know you'll agree. Is there anything else that you'd like to share before we close out here, Dr. Jarrett?
Yeah, I really appreciate the conversation, and I leave buoyed by the conversation. I think we can all do a few things, which one is continue the conversation that's been started tonight and make really visible the caregiving that is often so invisible in our society, and really lift up the people who do the work and lift up the possibilities for change. I love what Muna said about centering children and caregivers and community. And I encourage us to think about where and how, locally, if there's affordable housing being built, can childcare or caregiving be built into that, whether it's a new childcare center or a family childcare home, where you can address a caregiver's housing affordability and care in the community in a kind of a 2-for-1 solution. And then be a critical, engaged citizen. When you read coverage on these issues, get past the cost and what the potential benefit to kids or families might be, and what we could begin to envision something different than the broken system we have. And think about how in the state budget decisions, we're in an interesting moment where there's a surplus and there's more resources, and there's a lot of debate and needs in our communities, but consider the caregiving needs that have been elevated here as something that maybe can and should benefit from more public support. And don't forget, last but not least, I was reminded recently that vaccines aren't yet available for the littles, and some of those parents of the youngest kids are barely hanging on. So if you're feeling frustrated yourself, or like, oh, I'm just going to figure out when to get it, or things that people say in their moments of frustration, please remember that our youngest children and our most vulnerable aren't yet protected from vaccines. So maybe reach out to those parents with the extension of some of the trials, or not quite yet. Remember that they're really hanging on to a time to some return to normalcy that some of us who don't have unvaccinated people or littles in our households are enjoying. So remember them as well.
Thank you so much. And I really want to give a heartfelt thanks to all of you panelists, and then everyone who showed up on a Tuesday evening, took time out of your busy schedules to come and join us for this very important conversation. Duani and Mona and September, thank you so much for your eloquence, for your thoughtfulness, for your willingness to contribute to this ongoing conversation, to elevate the voices of caregivers, women and men, to think about the unequal burdens that are out there and ways we can address that, and also to create communities of care all around us so that we can all get through this pandemic one day at a time together. Thank you so much. I'm going to pass the baton back to Adine. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Heidi, this was fantastic. I have to tell everybody, I mean, and I can't say you all, but we did a little bit of a run through beforehand, and it was wonderful to bring everybody together. And then they just started. It was such, I think, a powerful moment for me to observe these powerful advocates talk about the issue, even in a dry rehearsal, and then see it repeated. And I think some of the things were obviously repeated for our sake, but so many points were new. I've taken extensive notes because I actually have to try to summarize this conversation. And for all of you who read off statistics as if it comes so naturally to you, it doesn't to me. So if you have the data, you feel free to share with me, please, because I think it would be important to disseminate that even further. There's been some great some points made. I think that So much of what you talked about is sort of just the huge, enormous challenge in this. I will tell you that one of my first forays in employment opportunities when I came and moved here in 2007 was actually working on an early childhood education initiative. This is in 2008. And the issues that then were important, whether it was accreditation support or basic salary and support, even professional development support, those issues haven't gone away. And now we have a pandemic that makes it even worse in some sense. And so I think there's things as society we can do, things that we can raise visibility about, things that we can certainly try to achieve around how to support those who are really marginalized in this process. And how do we advocate for? There's been an interesting sort of chat, even just going on right now, about the guaranteed income pilot program that's running in Mountain View. What might that lead to, for instance? We're very eager to see how that plays out. So I think there's lots of opportunities for further conversation. I would certainly invite many of you, all of you, if you're interested, come to the policy conversation when we have that one, because I think there's more that we can do along those lines. I will note, there are some people who are elected officials here who are sort of listening to the conversation. So I'll do a real quick shout out to Nisa Flagger and Jonathan Weinberg, who are here, Penny Lay, former mayor of Los Altos, and others who are here as well, listening in, and hopefully can help be part of the policy conversations moving forward as well. So thank you, panelists. I really do appreciate the support and the opportunity to hear and to learn. You were all instrumental in sort of raising the visibility on this subject. I'll do a real quick wrap and thank you again, Duani, September, Mona, Heidi, for all the time and effort that you devoted to this. I will, again, all of you do this on a volunteer basis for us, so we really appreciate it from a community perspective. I will mention again that we had co-sponsors and annual sponsors who help underwrite this event. A recording will be made available for people who would like to review the information and share with their communities as well. I did get a little note that our Spanish language recording seemed to have crapped out again for whatever reason. So if anybody has some good solutions on that, we're always willing to be educated for that as well. For those of you who are attending, we will be sending a post-event survey and ask for those for feedback on this. We consistently look to learn and see how we can improve on these kind of sessions. We have adapted with the times. This is for us, a different approach in how we engage our community than in the past. But it will be important for us to be able to learn as well how we can improve on that. And as Hank brings up for us, your survey participation qualifies you as someone who might be selected to make a recommendation for a $500 grant to a local nonprofit of your choice, if your name is drawn. That survey will go out. It will be released, and we're looking for responses by noon on Wednesday. That's tomorrow. And we will announce the person selected by 3 p.m. tomorrow. And then, Hank, are you putting the survey link in the chat? Is that there? If you can, that'd be great.
There, it's in the chat.
Oh, excellent. I'm not looking at chat right now. And then I would just sort of finalize, sort of thank you for all of those of you who participated in this conversation and sent us your questions. We will be having our third community conversation later we sort of anticipate late March, early April, certainly before the Easter Passover kind of time frame. And again, as we said, this will focus on workforce and employment, in essence, how the pandemic has affected women in this context, and really, what can we learn about ways to address those issues as they come up. And so many of these are interconnected. I mean, we talked about mental health so much in here, which was actually the first session. And I suspect we spent some time talking about workforce and employment. Certainly a lot of that has been raised in this context, in this conversation as well. So we'll do a deep dive into that. So with that, thank you so much. I really appreciate all of your wonderful insights and a wonderful panel. I will certainly hang around for a little bit longer. And thank you for attending tonight.